Hello and welcome to Northern Nightmares, your home for nightmare stories throughout Canada and beyond, and I'm your host Andrew. For the 25th episode, I figured we'd dive into a new series. For this first part, I thought it would be fitting to dive into one of the biggest conspiracy theories within the UFO community. This theory has been heavily debated, but as of today, no one really knows what the truth is. Now, I will say some ufologists will say that this story is overhyped and not the most credible source, but after I go through the incident and the theories it created, maybe you'll have a different opinion. This story is like the Charlie Day meme from Always Sunny. All the strings are all over the board going in different directions. I'm going to stay laser focused on just the main story and the main theories. This story is like a rabbit hole. Once you fall into it, you'll find all kinds of wild stuff. But we'll get to all that soon enough. This tale takes us all the way back to 1947, to the state of New Mexico. During this time that a UFO had crash-landed sometime in July. This is the Roswell UFO incident. On July 4th, 1947, Independence Day, a man named Mac Brazel found some unknown debris at his ranch. Since it didn't look like anything we had at the time, Mac decided to load up his truck with as much as he could carry and drive it 75 miles to the nearest town, which was Roswell. Mac had described the debris as metallic fragments with rubber strips and a tinfoil-like quality, which is why he thought it was unusual. Mac made his way to the police station and took his findings to Sheriff Wilcox. As the two were inspecting the debris, the local radio host Frank Joyce of KGFL had just so happened to call the station, asking the sheriff if he had any new stories that he could tell. Wilcox passed the phone over to Mac, and as here, Mac retold his story. Joyce, believing that this was just a hoax, told Mac he should take his story to the military, thinking this should be handled by them. Whatever the two had said, it still remains as a mystery, as there's been rumors of the conversation, but nothing official. Being such a remote town back in this time, the only form of media was radio or the local papers. It's often debated if Mac himself knew anything about the idea of flying saucers. One rumor about Mac and Joyce's conversation is that they discussed the possibility of an alien craft. It wasn't long, though, after this conversation that a couple soldiers were dispatched to Mac's ranch to see what the hell was really going on. This was because Mac had contacted someone to report his new discovery. Major Jesse Marcel and Captain Sheridan Cavett were sent to the ranch and supposedly sent to investigate the crash site. These two were sent here from the Roswell Army Airfield, which was home to the 509th Bomb Group. Now, a little side note here, the 509th Group was involved with the Manhattan Project. For anyone unfamiliar, that's the project that created the atomic bomb, the bomb that the US had dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan, during World War II, and is also Los Alamos, New Mexico, is a spot where they tested the first nuclear blast before the official drop. Los Alamos is about 3.5-hour drive from Roswell. Coincidence? I think not. But let's not get ahead of ourselves yet. These two soldier boys left with the debris Mac had found and told them it was just a weather balloon experiment, which in fairness could be correct because as of that year the US had in fact launched thousands of top secret balloons, which they made into carrying devices to listen in on the Soviets if they were doing any nuclear tests themselves. This was called Project Mogul. It was on June 4th, 1947 at the Alamogordo Army Base that researchers had launched these so-called balloons, a long train of them, in fact. However, they claimed they lost contact with them after they traveled 17 miles out of their reach. These balloons were made with tinfoil, rubber, and wooden beams to hold up the structure. Remember, this is 2 years after World War II and already 2 years into the Cold War, so the US was feeling a lot of emotions right now. They had just dropped the bomb to end all wars. Who was to say that someone was going to do the same to them? And also for the fact here in Canada, We're so close in between Russia and US that if either side launched bombs, we are royally fucked. So if this was just a balloon, how did the story become one with flying saucers and aliens? Well, 2 days after Mac had talked to Joyce at the KGFL radio about his findings, a soldier named Lieutenant Walter Holt delivered a story to Joyce to mention on the air. This story was about the US government finding a flying saucer outside of Roswell, but after a couple days of this, the government had retracted what they said, claiming it was just a balloon. Because of these claims, the world went crazy with the story, believing we had been visited by another race from beyond our planet. What we know of sci-fi started right from this point in history. Well, after this incident, rumors and claims spread like wildfire. The biggest one was the government didn't just recover a flying saucer, but also recovered bodies of beings about 3 to 4 feet tall, with large eyes and heads, and definitely not from this world. However, this was just a speculation because as of today, there is no definite proof, and also we have no idea when the crash actually happened because there is no official date and no proof a crash even happened. But if we have no proof, why is that this one is one of the biggest debated topics of today? Well, let's explore some theories to continue this mysterious story. I'm going to dive right into the top theory, to which is about Project Mogul. As I just mentioned, Project Mogul was about launching balloons to spy on the Russians after World War II was over. These balloons were designed and equipped to have microphones and radar deflectors. When launched high in the air, the US could monitor what they were doing, and the main focus was with nuclear weapons. Because during this time, the Russians were the most likely country developing them. After the fall of Germany, the destruction of Japan, and China not being anywhere near it is today, the Soviet Union had acquired European scientists and German nuclear programs, making them the likely threat. However, in saying that, what if they were thinking the exact same thing? It was the US that made and dropped the atomic bomb first, pushing them in the lead of the nuclear arms race. We have no idea what tech the Ruskies could have had been developing during this time. So it's often thought that the weather balloon wasn't a balloon, but could be a top-secret Russian craft. For example, Jesse Marcel Jr. was the son of Major Jesse Marcel, the soldier that visited Mac at his ranch. Well, he showed his son the debris, and it was taken in by the government afterwards. Jr. claims that he remembers the so-called debris as aluminum-like foil and had unusual symbols printed on all over the pieces. Now, I say this respectfully, in the time, if these symbols were Russian, they could indeed look weird to English-speaking country. The Russian symbols are different compared to English language, but that's what makes languages so unique. It wouldn't be any different than if one were to look at, let's say, the Asian language or even Egyptian hieroglyphs. For anyone at the time that's not diverse in other languages, this could easily look alien. Speaking of aliens, it's often debated that the bodies that were discovered from the so-called crash, these claims didn't happen, though, till the 80s, and during the late 40s there wasn't anything mentioned about bodies, only the mention of a flying saucer. There were countless books published in the 80s by researchers like Stan Friedman, William Moore, and Charles Berlitz, all claiming that non-human bodies were recovered. These books had detailed interviews from dozens of witnesses, allegedly. Stories of a second crash were also popping up around this time, claiming non-human bodies with large heads. Secret military autopsies and even child-sized coffins were seen around Roswell. A year later, in 1948, another crash is said to have had crashed in Aztec, New Mexico, about 6 hours from Roswell. This so-called crash included stories of recovered aliens and debris, like Roswell's crash. However, this was later determined to be a hoax. The people behind it just wanted some media attention. But the ideas of bodies did get attached to Roswell later because of this. Another theory suggests that an alleged hangar housed extraterrestrial craft and possible alien bodies. Hangar 18 was located at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base just east of Dayton, Ohio. This theory was explored in famous UFO book Behind the Flying Saucers by author Frank Scully, which was published 3 years later after the incident. The theory also claims that the Aztec hoax wasn't a hoax and that bodies were discovered and moved here. However, as we may never know, there is no proof of such claims. But I will say there was always been weird shit attached to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, but we'll get to explore that in more detail in the next part. Like I mentioned in the beginning, the fantasy of flying saucers and aliens started around this time, after Roswell, New Mexico became a hotspot for UFO community. Plus, a few organizations popped up with the goal of learning about UFOs, like Project Blue Book. I mentioned them a couple times in past episodes, like the Falcon Lake and Betty and Barney Hill. Aliens are a common symbol and a character one could find throughout New Mexico, including a McDonald's restaurant in the shape of a flying saucer. But what if all this alien talk was just a cover-up? It's thought that the announcement of the flying saucers in 1947 was to take the pressure off the Americans during the arms race. Let the people focus on the crazy stories of aliens visiting instead of living in fear of nuclear blasts. Having the people distracted would let the government work in secret and continue the secret wars without the public's watchful eyes. All that because many years later, the government did announce the whole weather balloon story was indeed a cover-up story. So it begs the question now, what really happened back in 1947? What I can say is this: something did crash land in New Mexico at the time. I personally don't believe it was aliens, and I don't believe it was a weather balloon. For one thing, if you were to look up a photo of Major Jesse Marcel, he is holding debris, and it honestly just looks like a bunch of tinfoil. Also, the fact that the debris is described as common household stuff doesn't scream alien to me. What I think, though, is it was something made to fly. Something the US didn't want the world to know about. For one thing, this crash story, there were multiple people claiming to have saw weird lights flying at night before and after the incident. For one thing, we do know there was an Air Force base in the area. And plus, during this time, a lot of the now cities were small, sleepy towns. So who knows what was built in those remote parts of the desert. Something did happen during the summer of 1947, though, and it's been debated for many years. But without any proof, and a few witnesses like Mac or Major Jesse being long passed away now, we may never truly know what happened. But I do believe something did crash here, and it wasn't anything outer worldly. I do believe, though, that there's places in the world that may have alien tech or things we cannot imagine. In saying that, I would like to introduce something else. Only several years later, just outside New Vegas, another hotspot for weird shit would pop up. In 1955, another base would appear. But with talk of weird things in the sky around New Mexico, this place could have been up and running much earlier. But that's just my thought. This place is still around today, and is one of the most mysterious locations on Earth. It's also one of the most heavily guarded as well. This place has 2 entrances. One, on the north gate, you'll find a guard shack, a gate, and a fence marking a perimeter. There's also a back entrance where one would find a sign and a pickup truck on a hill watching for anyone that comes near. Most of you probably already know about this sign, and hell, you may even know what I'm talking about. Visitors love driving here just to see it and take pictures, but if one were to cross the line, you could be arrested. Hell, you could even be shot. This place is Area 51, and it's here that people claim the real alien stories exist. Roswell is just one of many reasons why Area 51 exists, and it's here that we'll continue the story next week. For next week, we'll dive into Area 51, its creation, its official purpose, and the claims of its true goals. These claims don't just come from the UFO community, but from many famous people like past presidents and even Bob Lazar. But we'll go into more about that next week, as I believe the next part is the most important to this series and the UFO world. So you can send me more stories you want me to cover in the future to northernnightmares@outlook.com. Hit that subscribe button to get notified when new episodes drop, and I'll see you next week. Sweet dreams, and remember, nightmares are closer than you think.